Welcome to the next episode of the Tech on Toast podcast. And it's a special today. We're joined live in Dojo's offices and with Rob Howells, Senior Vice President of Technology. Is that right? Did I get that right?
That's right.
Very nice to meet you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to this conversation.
No, thank you. You've picked my specialist subject, not. No, I think everybody's interested in AI right now. And we're going to have a chat around AI in business. But before we get into that, just tell us a little bit about your role at Dojo and what you do here.
Sure. So I've been with the business a little over 2 years now. As SVP of Technology, that means I work with and look after the broader engineering and data communities here. I have had a career that has been fintech focused throughout. Before Dojo, I was in one of Jan and George's other payments businesses as their CTO there. And before that, I spent about 15 plus years in the capital market space. So I've always been drawn to industries which have high amounts of data within them. So an opportunity from kind of AI, I suppose, presented itself throughout that journey. And I've really very much been drawn to, I really kind of fallen in love with technical problems that have big impacts. And I think that's been a recurring theme throughout and before payments in that capital market space. I co-founded a couple of businesses building proprietary trading platforms. So kind of innovating with data has been something that's been part of my career story so far.
And I think it's really interesting that now we land in this, for us normal folk, we land in the world of AI. And AI in business, I think, is something that is, over the last year, particularly in my world, in hospitality, has suddenly started to become a talking point, I would say, maybe not been action yet. But what does it actually mean, AI in business? How can you kind of like broaden that for us?
If we take a little step back, I think it's so much more than thinking about computers mimicking sort of humans. And I think that's really a lot how in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of attention focusing on that element. But for me, it's a spectrum of possibility where we're using this technology to, and places like Dojo, for example, really expand our art of the possible. And the way I think about that and the way we're starting to think about it more and more at Dojo is sort of across 3 levels, really, of sort of automation, augmentation, and amplification. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So automation has been something, to be honest, we've been doing, and the industry's been doing for a while with AI, and that's really kind of looking at those repetitive tasks and more menial tasks. I think what's more exciting more recently is the augmentation element. That's the AI and human combination. How do we start to do things faster? How do we start to do things better than before? And I think where this is going on that spectrum for me is that amplification piece. Is how does that tool, that AI tooling with that human, how do we start to elevate and reinvent the ways that we do things? So I said, at the moment, I think we're really moving from that automation to augmentation phase. It's doing things better at greater scale than before. But I'm really excited about how do we start to completely eliminate some of those barriers, whether they're technical expertise or processes that frankly get in the way of our people doing their jobs. And I think that's what's still to come. And that's the potential. That's the prize for me.
Yeah, and it alludes back to what you talked about at the start, big data and making a big impact, right? And the ONS reported recently that around 1 in 6 UK businesses are now using at least one part AI technology, and 70% are using it up to improve cybersecurity. Why do you think it's still relatively low in terms of uptake if you think about some of the trends that have come before this? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think I believe that the adoption numbers have moved probably quite a bit more since that sort of ONS report came in. I think that was probably from maybe a couple of years ago. But what I would still say is, whilst I think adoption of the technology is probably moved on quite a bit in a more positive direction since that report, what I'm still seeing is a gap between businesses that are using AI at a proof of concept, POC stage, versus those that have been able to convert those POCs into production grade instances. And I think there's a variety of reasons for why that uptake perhaps is still not as great as we would like it to be. I think one is looking at the data quality, the data governance that businesses have. I think to really utilize this technology to its fullest potential, you need to have very clean, structured data. You need to make it easier for AI to consume that data. And that's still something that I think many businesses are not yet well prepared or set up to do. I think you've got ethical and trust concerns that come into play here. I think that comes from both people being more fearful about things that they don't understand and worrying about how ethical and how trustworthy is the data that's feeding this. But also, if I look at businesses like Dojo, we're a regulated business. And that means, and those regulations and our compliance with those are there to protect our customers and to protect people. So making sure that this new technology is clearly complying with that is also something that I can see stopping many businesses from fully being able to go beyond the kind of the lab sort of context. The other thing is, sort of still a skill gap. I think this is relatively new, and there are not that many people out there that are sort of proficient. There are no real rule books yet on how to do this at scale, and that is also another barrier. But probably one of the biggest things I see is in terms of tripping up businesses at that POC stage, trying to go beyond, is I talked about at the beginning. One narrative for my career has always been trying to fall in love with problems, and I think in this case, there's a lot of examples out there where I think people have fallen in love with the solution, and so they've got this AI solution,
Shortcut,
and well, yes, is it? They're looking for a problem it's going to fix, and I think that means that you get these underwhelming moments where these POCs then don't maybe have the impact that they could have or should have, and that's not because the technology doesn't have promise, but because we probably not picked the right use case to pursue.
It's very interesting, and I think I did a talk the other night with about 100 restaurant operators and asked them show of hands who was using ChatGPT in their business. Everybody. And I think if I'd asked that maybe even 18 months ago, you'd probably have 10%.
Completely changed, yeah.
And Deloitte said there's 7 million people in the UK have used some kind of generative AI at work. Do you think, as you said, maybe is the tech early? As in, do you think that it's like a ground level kind of movement, or do you think it's a top down strategy coming from the amount of people using it? So people self-discovery with ChatGPT and all the other stuff out there, or is it the other way around?
I think it's a bit of both. Like many trends, you're going to have your portion of early adopters that I guess start to form those grassroots, movements. And I think the more, those grassroots communities then start to increase pressure in terms of, at a top level leadership point of view, to start to be more intentional about what should or could their strategy be. So you sort of get that top down, then starting to, so almost like a feedback loop. And here at Dojo, there's a bit of a combination of both. I mean, the tools, people like OpenAI, ChatGPT, they've incredibly friendly user interfaces. It's much more ubiquitous now. It's also quite easy to get going with it, which means that I think that's helped that grassroots adoption become quite, as you said, quite widespread. I'm not surprised to hear that you were getting that kind of response rate from it. And what we're doing here is both from the top, so we have senior leadership buy-in that this is important. This is something that we must get behind and are investing in. But we're also tapping into those grassroots communities. We formed sort of like an AI champions group. And how do we tap into that to make sure that our communication is more effective, that any gaps in skills and feedback on that is happening in a tight way, and ultimately leveraging that top-down endorsement with that sort of bottom-up evangelism.
Yeah, and I think all of it's down to, you talked before about solution versus problem. And people are kind of almost trying to find the problem, not have the problem first, excuse my words, getting mixed up there. But what are the common use cases we're looking at when it comes to implementing AI or solving problems with it? Can you give us some examples of what's happening?
Yeah, sure. I think there's maybe three core dimensions that I think people are pursuing with this. You've got efficiency gains. So how can we save money? How can we be more cost effective, save time, free up people's time? You've got effectiveness. So how can we use the technology to help people do a better job? Not necessarily just faster, but actually get more accurate results. Have bigger impact. And then the third one would be looking at maybe the innovation side of things. Can we come up with new products, new services that we can offer or sell as a business? I think that last one is happening, but perhaps on a smaller sort of scale. I'd say what we're really seeing quite a lot of success in is in the first two camps, that efficiency and effectiveness points. And when I look at examples, I mean, I think there's now an increasingly wide variety of industries and sort of domains within those industries where we're using this technology. But there's a few, I would say, common established good examples for this. Customer service is definitely a huge one. So things like AI chatbots, being able to do things like intelligent routing, of queries and calls to the right department. Things like, for example, sentiment analysis, to enrich the customer service agents' experience or the quality of support that they're giving their customers. So I think that's a huge area, and seeing that across multiple industries, quite well established now. You also got opportunities in things like marketing and sales. How can we do much better sort of predictive lead scoring, for example, content generation, particularly looking at maybe personalized content generation. How can we tailor campaigns and optimize ad campaigns to reach the right audience and speak and use relative sort of language? I would say operations functions in general, whatever that may be. That if I look at Dojo, for example, that can range from things like our onboarding and sort of KYB process. How do we streamline that? How do we make it more effective? As a regulated business, there's scheme and regulatory compliance use cases. There's a lot of procedural, operational divisions within a company that I think lend themselves very, very well to this. Cybersecurity, something you touched on.
I'm well informed on that.
Is another one, whether that's fraud prevention or whether that's sort of threat detection, anomaly detection, and a big one is software engineering. And I'm not talking about vibe coding. That's almost a forbidden term here. That's a very, very different thing. It's great for rapid prototyping, but it's not how you build sort of engineering solutions at scale. But absolutely looking at sort of how do we complement our engineering force with this kind of tooling. We talk about sort of AI native engineering, and that's from the code it generates to the test cases that it produces to the documentation that can accompany that code. So those are some pretty well-established areas where we're finding this technology being used successfully and at scale.
Consistency in operations in hospitality, particularly where I'm really interested in it, it's been hard to achieve for many, many years. You need area managers and all to do it. Do you think that unlocking AI in that field, or not just in operations, but around some of the payments, PCI, is going to really support these industries going forward? Because I feel like they're in a moment when they're in between and they're struggling with obviously finding people, employing people. There's a high churn on people. Do you think that AI is going to plug a bit of a gap there?
I think it can create a level playing field. As I mentioned earlier, how do we use this technology to better maybe eliminate barriers to getting in the way of our people? And so I think a lot of what you've described there are they're areas, domains of expertise, but they're quite established. There's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of material on them, and all of that feeds incredibly well into the world of AI tooling. So how do we augment those kinds of industries and those kinds of skill sets with not having to go and become PCI experts and so forth? So absolutely.
And I wanted to talk about one particular case study. Poly.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You know about this? So it's a really clever use of AI for discount delivery, but also shows the tension, I suppose, between personalization and fairness. Where's the line? How should we business balance innovation versus customer trust and not cross that line?
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting example, and I'm not surprised that there was some mixed sort of feedback from people as to kind of how that feature landed. On the one hand, I do see the innovation, changing the kind of the paradigm of how one does sort of discounting and so on. But I think for me a big issue is I think maybe businesses not fully considering that transparency. We talked a little bit before about how I think the trust or the perceived lack of trust or worrying about the ethics side of things can be a barrier to adoption. And I think it's the barrier to perhaps a seamless experience or a good feeling from a consumer point of view when you're interacting with AI in this way. And I think businesses, to get that balance right, I think key for me is that they really identify and focus on that transparency, being able to explain how and why the AI solution arrived at the conclusion that it did. And in this case, if we want to look at it from a discounting point of view, you don't want the user to feel that perhaps there's an element of sort of profit driving here. I'm only going to offer you a discount if you think to ask for one. I think it can lead to these sort of cynical points of view, and I think in this case they were actually genuinely looking to find a way to positively engage with their customers and truly be innovative. But I think there is this danger that can come across without some more explanation. That can come across as potentially sort of exploitative of those that let's say are less savvy of the technology or less inclined to think or ask these things. And again, why am I getting a discount? Does that mean that there was just fat margin lying around there that you're hoping I wouldn't get to. And so I think, again, thinking about the decision process that frames the AI, the guy, is this because, for example, this is a repeat customer? So actually, as a repeat customer, we see that you buy with us regularly. We'd like to offer you a loyalty discount on top of that, or because there's an opportunity to buy more things, and we'll give you an additive sort of discount. I think otherwise it feels a little bit opaque, and that black box can be, I think, a real barrier to getting that trust element.
And I suppose that quite a bit of education still to be done isn't there, around AI, because I think, as I said, ChatGPT is a commonly used tooling now. But the reality of what you're talking about there is just doing something and putting it out, and not really fully explaining how that bot's ending up with its decision making. That education piece is quite big, isn't it? What's going to happen for the next 5-10 years?
Huge. I mean, I think you've got education in general to kind of the masses. I think I'm tomorrow, for example, I'm actually going to Imperial College as part of their advisory board to talk about the future of computer education and how AI can and might need to shape that. But you've also got it within companies as well. So a big part of what we're doing here at Dojo is starting to think much more intentionally about how do we drive that AI literacy. Something that actually worries me more broadly about this, I believe in the power of this tool. It's only getting more and more capable. Still not great at everything necessarily, but there are plenty of things.
Hallucinates occasionally.
Oh yes, it does, and I think being also that's the part of the education piece. Being honest and being vocal about, yes, it's really strong at lots of things, but it's also not yet good at a lot of things. And sharing those things, I think, is so important, because from an education point of view, otherwise you're getting these warped points of view as to what, you see. If you see only the bad, then you walk away thinking disillusioned with what it can do. Equally, you potentially succumb to the hype too much. If you don't recognize, if you're only seeing the absolute amazing success stories.
And I think we're really in that moment now. It feels like it anyway in business. I think we're really in that moment where it's kind of everyone's in between. Some are on the fence and some aren't. What are the biggest reasons to invest in AI now? So if you're sitting there thinking, okay, this is great, sounds clever, it sounds like you can fix a lot of our problems, but why now? Why would you get into it now and not wait another 5 years?
I mean, I think as a business, we're in an incredible sweet spot right now in terms of, I think we've had it's still new, but I think we've had enough success and enough interest and investment in this that it's gone beyond being niche and a fad. I think there's a growing consensus that in some way, shape, or form, this is now here to stay. And so I think as a business, you've got that benefit of more tooling. There's more infrastructure available with which you can start to use this. So I think the barriers to entry are lower. But you've still got that, as I said, sweet spot where you're early enough as a business to still be considered, I think, an early adopter, particularly if you set the groundwork in place so that you're not just spinning up your next POC, a lab project that doesn't go anywhere. So if you're intentional about these things, I think you have an opportunity as a business to really start to set the playbook for what great looks like, and really establish yourself as a thought leader. And I think that's going to do lots of things, not just to your business, but in terms of your customers or the product that you're offering, but also your talent. I think it's going to be a hugely powerful tool for attracting and retaining talent. I think on the flip side, I talked about maybe a few carrots about how it can elevate your business there, and why hopefully those would be motivators enough. But I think there is also that opportunity cost of not getting involved now, I think, is also rapidly growing. And so I think if you're not doing it, your competition almost certainly are. And I mentioned that kind of talent point as well. You're going to struggle, I think, to retain. People are increasingly looking to work in roles and within companies that give them access to this tooling, that are upskilling them in this. And I think there's a real danger that between your employees, versus your competitors, I think customer expectation is also growing. I think they're seeing this in other aspects of their life, whether that's video streaming services like Netflix or whether it's Amazon. They're increasingly seeing AI used to help personalize their experience. And so that expectation, I think, is broadening. I think there's a real danger that businesses become irrelevant if they don't get involved sort of in this kind of technology. I was kind of looking at a quote. I had a quote shared with me from an author called Peter Hinson. He's written a book called The New Normal a number of years ago now. And he said, BC no longer stands for before Christ. It stands for before ChatGPT. And I think for me, it's a great illustration of the fact that this is a movement
It's a moment, isn't it?
it's a moment in time, and it's a material moment in time, much in the way of the internet or smartphones changed the paradigm for engaging with consumers out there. And I think businesses need to be relevant if they won't be relevant if they're not acknowledging it.
And I liken it. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the internet coming on and in phones and all that stuff.
Likewise.
Yeah. and I remember it being websites, particularly. Actually, I remember people saying, why would I put my company on the internet? Well, and obviously we've moved on since then, right? And it's obviously was a good idea. And same with social media and all the other stuff that's followed. And I feel like this is the first time since that I feel like this there's such a big shift.
It is.
For business as well as also in our day-to-day lives.
Hugely transformative. And businesses have an opportunity. As I said, we're still early enough that you have an opportunity to be that thought leader to help shape what this is. So I think that's tremendously exciting for businesses.
And we talked about some efficiency gains, but particularly in supply chain, cybersecurity, which I spoke to Naveed about before, which is really eye-opening in terms of what Dojo are doing. Which of these are kind of, where are you getting the quickest ROI? You know, people are impatient, want to see where can I get my quickest gain. But where are you finding AI is producing that gain quick enough?
I mean, I think, cybersecurity is a great one. I think demonstrating or talking about the value proposition in terms of protecting our customers, protecting or preventing fraudulent transactions at the scale that we're at. This can be millions and millions, tens of millions of pounds. So I think that there's a great narrative there, but it's probably things that I've touched on already, really, in terms of, I think customer service is a fantastic area from an ROI point of view. Just the sheer, we have 150,000 businesses, and we pride ourselves on first class service, and a lot of that requires kind of high touch engagement from our customer service agents. And so if I take a step back, it's the broad customer operations piece, I think, is a fantastic area from an ROI point of view, because it's not just what a customer might directly experience, it's what happens behind the scenes. How do we empower our customer service agents to have more free time, or the time that they do spend with our customers to be that much richer?
So I'm going to ask you the question, how do you start? Because I think a lot of people are looking at this opportunity thinking they agree with you. And I think, as I said, the show of hands the other night kind of says people are ready. But how do they kind of get started on that journey? They don't know what to do. How do they go about building a roadmap for AI?
That's a great question. What we've done here, and my advice to listeners on that would be to take a step back and really think about, what is it that you want as a business AI to unlock or achieve for you? In our case, I believe in, we've talked about it a lot, but I really believe in the transformative potential, not just potential, actually, the transformative effect it's already having with businesses, and there's more potential out there. And so for me, it was this recognition that this is going to transform every role, every business to a greater or lesser extent. And so that really very sort of led us to kind of crafting a vision statement for AI, which was to be the model workplace where AI is unlocking the full potential of our people. And that's really to see them be the happiest, the most innovative, and the most productive professionals shaping the future of in-person payments. We're talking about transforming our business to being an AI native business, and that's what it was for us. That's what the ambition is, and so it's hugely important in defining what that vision is for your business, because that's the framing for everything that then comes. As part of then identifying that vision, we then moved on to the next step, which is, so okay, what's going to be our next 12-month mission towards that vision? And for Dojo, that was looking at establishing those fundamentals on which we were going to build an AI native business, and that included something we talked about earlier, AI literacy. And that is with our exec team all the way through to the rest of the company, making sure we understand what this is and what its potential is, and keep that going, as this is rapidly changing. It's about making sure that we have the right data foundations and the right data assets, and that we have the right governance in place. This is still a relatively nascent field. So I'm sure Naveed would have talked about it, but from a security point of view, making sure that we are bold, but grounded and informed. And a big part of that is not doing this as a tech silo initiative, but this is us working with Naveed's team in security. It's working with the legal team as well, to make sure that all of those are aligned and working together to set us up for that success. We didn't want us to hit those proof of concept fancy demos that then can't go anywhere because it doesn't comply from a regulatory or legal point of view or from a security standpoint. I would then sort of, going back to this, don't be that solution finding a problem, sort of situation. You don't want to find yourself in that situation. And so what we did was we started canvassing across the business for what are your top problem statements. I kind of like, yes, we framed it as we're doing and we're asking this question because we're excited to see where AI could play a role. But the brief was, but don't tell us about an AI solution. Don't assume AI or can or can't fix your problem. Tell us what is your number one problem. I often frame this in the form of, what would you get your next person or your next 10 people to do? What are you looking to hire for? That's probably a good indication of where your biggest problems are. And we had, in the matter of a few weeks, we had over 100 use cases submitted across our business, which we then spent time curating. And that's the next step, which is really be intentional about which ones you start with. And it's not starting with 100. I mean, it's great to get so many. But first of all, not all of them were great AI fits. But it's really being intentional. What are those high impact ones? Picking 2 or 3 of those, making sure that they're achievable, thinking about success metrics. What does great look like if we work on this? And then getting a team of people that you're properly supporting working on those. And so I think those steps for us have worked really well. And I think they could really be useful for framing how another business might want to get started on this if they haven't already.
Very useful. And I think just clearly kind of pushing everything aside from it and looking at the objective, like you said at the start there, almost having a mission statement for what you want to achieve is crucial to any project you start on, any journey you're going to go on. So it makes real sense. And obviously you guys have a certain resource here at Dojo. And how do you, if you're smaller or maybe even if you're a bigger enterprise, how do you kind of balance internal capability versus using an external partner when it comes to this kind of work? Is it, how much do you want to keep it, I suppose, in-house?
Great question. I mean, look, I think the size of your organization will play a role in this. But if I take if I'm sort of agnostic of the company size, I think how precious you might want to be about whether this is in-house or not, I think really depends on exactly what is the nature of your business. I mean, if I'm building AI LLM models, then I'm probably going to be fairly precious about who I have working on that. That's very proprietary IP that I want to protect. For a business like Dojo, that's not really the layer that is our USP or that I'm seeking to sort of expand our thought leadership in. I'm actually mindful. There was a concern really about how much energy we invest too low level at that stage. These are areas that are increasingly being commoditized. If I think of AI infrastructure tools or AI platform services, I'm mindful that we are very limited in how much we want to build at that layer rather than consume. I'm much more interested in how do we use that tooling, that infrastructure, that capability to unlock better payments, better customer service, the bits that make Dojo special. And there isn't a playbook for how to do this well. So I think there is a USP in businesses that know how to unlock this potential. And so that is something that is perhaps a little bit more sensitive. And I'm certainly keen to invest in that in-house. But even on that journey, we don't need to go it alone, and we're not going it alone. So how do we stand on the shoulders of giants? So we're working with, now we have a number of technology partners and collaborators, but we're working very heavily with Google, for example, and whether that's their Gemini sort of model, whether that's the Vertex AI platform on which we build the agents. If I take Gemini, for example, we've rolled it out across our entire real estate here. Again, it's that adoption, it's that training, it's that putting it in front of people. So the tooling is much more readily available than it was before. And so I think that helps you do certain things, you can say in-house in a way more readily. But we are also working with partners to help us validate the way we're thinking about some of these solutions. We're a very big Salesforce partner, for example. And so we've invested a lot in preparing data to be consumed across the various Salesforce offerings, which really kind of made it a natural place for us to start exploring synergies with Agentforce, which is their AI agent platform built on top of Salesforce. So we're definitely looking at various partnerships as well. A really interesting one that I'm quite proud of is we started a collaboration with Imperial College, where we have 10 Imperial MEng computing AI students with us, and they're part of a newly formed AI Trailblazer program. And here, the idea behind this is we've got some investment from Google as well from a training point of view, but the idea is how do we get intensive training, almost like sort of an immersive boot camp, not just on the technology, but on what Dojo is, what does it mean to work in customer service, what are those problem statements there, or in risk and underwriting. So really, really immersive, deep, in-house kind of knowledge, which we then use to seed those use cases I mentioned earlier, and start to explore different streams in a really rapid, iterative, incremental way. How do we start working in? Sort of, if not days, weeks, to sort of test things, to get sort of to validate whether or not we're getting the results we expect, and we will stumble, we will hit a few sort of dead ends, but that's okay if the feedback cycle is relatively short. So it's an in-house curated program, but it's augmented and supported by partnerships.
And it almost goes back to our grassroots question at the start, right? You're actually involving these people who are involved in the movement or younger, got that thirst for it, but kind of taking part. It's fantastic. And bringing it back to payments, how is it adapting to AI, and is it keeping up?
Yeah, definitely more to go. No, but I mean, it is. I mean, we're in a very highly competitive sort of industry, and so you're seeing that across our competition, and Dojo is certainly not kind of resting on that front. So we talk about customer service. I think that's something Dojo's been using AI for quite some time in that space. Over a year ago, we launched a call summarization piece, for example, that really tries to provide our customer service agents with an automated way of generating their call summaries, generating actions, freeing them up to take the next call. But also, more recently with Salesforce, again, it's the speed with which things are moving. That was a UK English-based solution, and as we become over the last year a more international business with operations in Spain, Italy as well, we're sort of always on the backlog on how do we expand this to multi or other languages. But actually, with the kind of evolution of the AI tech stack, we don't really need to do much more tech investment to again, it's that art of the possible now. It's just another language is almost like
barrier removal, as you discussed before, right? A business 2 years ago would probably struggle to.
Absolutely, it would be a huge investment to think about making this sort of a multi-language capability. That AI Trailblazer group are looking at a customer service agent chatbot that's they've got so many information sources with which to try and offer support to our customers, and so how do we consolidate lots of disparate information sources in real time for our customer service agents, so that they have that context-aware, real-time sort of information around the customer that they're speaking to, a much richer history about that customer. But also, as we become sort of, as I said, multi-geographic based, but also multi-product, you've now got much more sort of cognitive load that those customer service agents need to bear in mind to do an effective job. And so how do we turbocharge that is an area that we're looking at, and I'm sure other businesses will be as well. Fraud is a big one. I mean, we use AI tooling to help us with more accurate sort of fraud detection, and with fewer false positives, and that's, I mean, the speed with which fraudsters move mean that a traditional rule-based system simply can't keep up with those. So it's sort of fighting that game on a more equal level playing field on that front. Chargebacks is another area. Typically very bureaucratic, process driven, not necessarily maybe the first domain you might think of when it comes to innovation. But we're looking at how can AI look at sort of automating large aspects of that, particularly the information gathering process. I mean, some chargeback, and for the readers or the listeners, I guess to this, chargeback is a dispute mechanism. So this is where a consumer disputes whether a transaction was really made by them. And that's quite an involved process in terms of backwards and forwards. Do I need CCTV evidence that the merchant supplies? So it can be quite an expensive and sort of laborious process, both for us and our customers. So AI, we've got a stream at the moment building a sort of an automated chargeback flow powered by AI that really massively speeds up the summarization, the analysis of that information, and really tries to get to solving this quite painful problem for our customers.
Another great example, right, of that lengthy process where previously, well, like when you were talking about the 100 problems that come to you, the 100 common use cases you could use. It's a great example of where backwards and forwards happens a lot between, or maybe 3 different parties: the customer, your customer, and you guys.
That's right. That's right.
So piecing all those, bridging all that together with AI, that shortcut to kind of success.
I mean, when we saw that use case, it shot up.
Yeah.
We for the reasons you just described, it was a clear pain point for those 3 parties involved, but also one where we saw the AI could actually be a really great fit for, and early results certainly indicate.
And you got, I remember rightly, Dojo have the wall of pain. Is that right? You guys have this?
Yes.
When I first met you guys, I was told about it, but it's almost that in effect, right? Isn't it? Going back to, when you first built Dojo, you talked about the pain points, but now looking at it from an AI standpoint, what can you achieve? So look, it's very interesting. I could talk to you for an hour. I'm not allowed. I need you to give me 3 emerging, I suppose, AI tech trends that we think we've covered a little bit, that we could watch out for in the next 12 months that you think would be are going to make some movement.
Sure. I think one that comes to mind would be sort of hyper personalization and doing so at scale. And what I mean by that is really starting. We touched a little bit on this, but it's starting to look at in real time providing truly uniquely relevant sort of personalized feedback to a customer. I think loyalty, for example, for me is a great standout. I'm one here, really doing that well. Of course, making sure you're doing that with consent, and this comes back to that trust. Where are you coming at this from a decision process? Why are you offering these services? But I think it's a really exciting opportunity to really delight the end consumer. With things that are, as I said, relevant to them. They're expecting more and more of these kinds of things. But for me, it's that opportunity to really wow and delight. For example, recognizing, well, it's great that you've got an offer on burgers, but I'm a vegan, let's say, and you don't have
send me that.
I'm not interested in your beef burger offer. So being able to recognize what's right for this particular consumer, or maybe is my early riser. Get your coffee, get a pound off your coffee because you're coming in super early. So I think this is a really exciting space, because I think with this technology, you can really do it at scale. I think that's what's the challenge for is sort of computationally and sort of labor intensively kind of infeasible really kind of to look at that before. Another one for me would be the rise of agentic AI. Over the last sort of 6 months, you're hearing that phrase kind of cropping up more and more. And by agentic AI, what we're really talking about is systems where you have multiple agents. Now, think of them as sort of like digital workers. And the difference here is starting to join those workers together, and now together they can start to tackle much more complex workflows and use cases. And so rather than having a summarizer or an analyzer, it's being able to group those things together to be much more proactive. And I think about it from let's say a sort of a fraud point of view. It's not just detecting or flagging that a transaction might be fraudulent. It might also be starting to initiate actions to warn the customer that there's a growing threat in other respects, or, for example, starting to automate gathering some information, or even automate the chargeback, the dispute process.
Almost like triggering behavior, like you would in a marketing campaign, like a nurture campaign.
Yes. So you can start to do far more complex. I think on the customer support side again, which is a recurring theme of ROI that we talked about earlier. How can you have multiple agents, looking on behalf of a customer account, maybe identifying, opportunities. Maybe there's an agent that tracks our terminal telemetry data and maybe recognizes that, one of your terminals is a bit old now. Maybe the battery life, sort of health isn't as good on that one. Maybe it can tell you about that, or even in advance, sort of order you a replacement terminal. So it's really starting to get much more sophisticated. So I'm very excited about the potential of taking a step up here and looking at the composition of multiple agents. And you're seeing a lot of technology trends supporting that. Things like Google's agent-to-agent protocol, starting to really think about how do we make it easier for these agents to talk to each other, irrespective of how those individual agents have been built. So I think that's going to be a super interesting place. And I think the third area for me would be the sort of explainability of AI. And I think that last use case on agentic, it's very, very powerful, but you also need to have those guardrails in place to make sure that they are working as intended within sort of their appropriately bounded contexts. And then of course, even on the hyper personalization piece, again, making sure that we're using information that is we're allowed to use, that's appropriate, that we're not perpetuating bias, that we can explain why it is that we're reaching out to you with a particular offering or with a particular service. I think all of that's becoming very, very relevant. You've got legislation that's looking at this. You've got the EU AI Act, for example. So transparency, fairness. I think the technology, I think, will need to start evolving much in the same way that you've got things like the agent-to-agent protocol. I believe that you will start to see standards form around how a model, an LLM, can prove where it's arrived or how it's arrived at its decision process, and standardizing how we do that, I think, is a direction that I see the tech sort of AI tech enablers really investing some energy in.
Look, it's fascinating. I think anybody listening has been on a journey the last 45 minutes across all the different factions, what AI can do or is doing, and also how it can be treated in business. That was Rob Howells, everybody. Thank you very much, Rob, for coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No, you are welcome. You'll find out more about Rob or Dojo, head over to dojo.tech, and we shall see you all next week. Thanks.
Thank you.